This week, April Wright and Matt Plosell join us for our discussion about WannaCry that makes us want to cry. In the enterprise security news this week, we are going to talk about if you need consulting to help you configure your security tools. Do you trust your security tools? Endpoint protection for surveillance companies, developing better IoT code, multi-service with multi-cloud, pitfalls to avoid, and CyberArk, CyberArk keeps buying companies, and updating an updated web application scanner. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Practice field, I had to do that to the door, and then once the wind caught it, I flew outside the door.
I call that a programmer's workout.
Yes, that is a programmer's workout.
I was at RSA. I got out. I have seen things. I've seen horrible things.
In order to deliver the maximum degree of privacy, personal data must be protected without action from an individual. In fact, this requirement is defined in the General Data Protection Regulation, also known as GDPR. What if you could reliably and efficiently build privacy into your information security programs by default? StealthBits Technologies provides solutions that allow data to be collected and used in a manner that achieves GDPR compliance. Privacy by design and by default is not just a GDPR requirement, it's the foundation of StealthBits Technologies. Visit stealthbits.com to learn more today. Gain control of cyber risk with Tenable.io, the first vulnerability management platform built for today's elastic assets like cloud, containers, and web apps. Discover a fresh, asset-based approach that prioritizes vulnerabilities while seamlessly integrating into your environment. And improve ROI with the first elastic licensing approach based on assets, not IP addresses. Tenable.io delivers the data and context you need to secure your elastic attack surface. Start your free Tenable.io trial today by visiting Tenable.io. Logarithm's Netmon Freemium delivers real-time network visibility to quickly identify emerging threats in your IT environment. Netmon Freemium is a free commercial-grade network forensics and traffic analytics solution. You can use Netmon Freemium's powerful capabilities to search against all observed network traffic, identify abnormal traffic patterns and application usage, and quickly analyze full packet captures. Take the first step towards real-time network visibility. Visit logarithm.com/freemium to learn more and download it today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly, episode 45 for Thursday, May 18th, 2017. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined by none other than Mr. John Strand. Welcome, John.
Happy to be back, Paul. Just had a good week at SAN Security West in San Diego. Had a great time hanging out with a bunch of other instructors. Went to Pomegranate, my all-time favorite restaurant in the United States. It's a Russian restaurant in San Diego. Hope you guys get a chance to check it out, mainly because they have half power vodka. It's like 20 proof. And you think, oh, wow, I can drink more of this. So you do.
Excellent. Sounds like fun. Here with me in studio, I have to my left, April Wright. April, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And Matt Plosell is here with us as well.
Hey there.
April, why don't you just give kind of like an introduction and brief background before we get started?
All right. My name's April Wright, and I work for Verizon Enterprise Solutions, I guess for Verizon Wireline now. And I do compliance and SDLC for new products to make sure that security is built into everything that we do.
Awesome.
Cool. I'm the Information Security Officer for Markley Group. So carrier center, data center, multiple POPs around the world. And we just rolled out our Cray as a service, so super SaaS. And I'm just in charge of security for our organization and our customers.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, welcome to the show. A couple of quick announcements before we get started. Check out Wild West Hacking Fest. or Hackin' Fest, I should say. It's put on by Black Hills Information Security for anybody and everybody interested in information security. Join us on October 27th and 28th for hands-on hardware hacking talks from famous InfoSecers like Dave Kennedy, Deviant Egypt, Chris Nickerson, Chris Gates, Mike Poor, Sub-T, and more. Check us out at Wild West Hackin' Fest. That's HACKIN Fest.com. Speaking of fests, the SANS Pen Test Hack Fest Summit call for presentations is now open, hosted by renowned SANS instructor and hacker Ed Scotus. They're looking for presentations on new attack techniques, remediation, challenges to existing security methodologies, and improving the business value of penetration testing. Send your submissions to pentestcfp@sans.org by 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, May 26th with the subject line, SANS Pen Test Hack Fest Summit CFP 2017. The event will take place in November on the 13th and 14th at the Hyatt Regency in Bethesda, Maryland. I said it right that time, Bethesda.
Got it. That was a mouthful. You did it. Congratulations.
Awesome. So, John, are you going to Hackfest or?
I don't know if I have much choice in the matter sometimes. I think I'm going, but I'm not sure. I think everybody just assumes that I'm going to be there.
Gotcha. I'm giving my talk on how to defend against penetration testers potentially at Hackfest. If Ed blesses
Potentially.
it. I don't blame him if he doesn't. I mean,
it takes that a while to come around, but he does. We're right now talking with trying to get him here for Wild West Hackin' Fest. It sounds like he's going to be able to come out, so it should be a lot of fun too. So we'll see.
Awesome. Alrighty. Well, let's jump right into the news. Identropy and Exabeam partner to improve cybersecurity, of course. Identropy is a leading security consulting firm that specializes in advisory, implementation, and managed services for identity and access management. Exabeam, they kind of tout themselves as security intelligence, although I think they're very well rooted in UBA, user behavior analytics technologies. However, their messaging seems to be getting away from that, as I think largely, as we predicted, John, the UBA space has been absorbed into a lot of other security technologies, no?
Well, and we had talked about this quite a bit, and one of the things that everyone needs to keep in mind is that standard technologies like your traditional SIM vendor is going to start eating up the rest of the behavioral analytics space. So if you have like a pure play behavioral analytics provider, it's going to be very, very, very hard for them to compete with a company that has a solution that's maybe 80, 85% as effective, but it's already in a customer's location, like an ArcSight, for example, or a Splunk. So I think that this is actually a really good move for Exabeam, simply because tying in that behavioral analytics and then tying it in with something like Identropy, which does the identity and access management, is a good play because it's continuing to grow and integrate with other parts of security that are becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger deal whenever it starts dealing with identity. And this is kind of a cool theme for today's show. You know, do we talk about this? We talk about CyberArk. We talk about a bunch of Casby is in here as well. And it's kind of interesting because we've said it in the past on Security Weekly and on Enterprise Security Weekly. It's really becoming that identity is becoming the perimeter of the next 5 to 6 years. And these old ideas of DMZs and firewalls and endpoints are slowly going to start to not fade away completely, but they're going to be not as near as important as they once were. So I think that this is a good play, and I think we should be seeing more of this type of movement in the space over the next 18 to 24 months.
No, it's interesting. I agree that we need consulting services to get identity and access management going, because that's a huge project, and you're probably likely to contract with someone to do that. Some of these other security technologies, though, and we see these announcements happen all the time, I don't necessarily believe to get SIM and UBA going, you shouldn't really need consulting services. Maybe to tie it into your IAM, but I don't know.
Well,
what do you folks think?
I think that's one of the core problems with it, right? We've talked about this. What percentage of all of your event logs that you have in your SIM have directly correlated reports or alerting associated with them? And your SIM vendor is going to come back and say, well, you should capture absolutely everything, because if there's an incident, you're going to be really glad that everything's there, which is total and complete garbage and crap. By and large, a lot of the different event log management vendors know exactly what types of event logs they need to look at. And like 90 to 95% of all the event logs that are sitting in your SIM will never, ever be looked at. But if the entire business model for a SIM vendor is completely based on the volume that you actually ingest, well, they're going to continue to sell you something that's going to ingest absolutely everything. So I think you and I have been talking about this for a couple of years now. We need to be more intelligent about how we're doing logging and alerting. And the behavioral analytics part is just part of that. It's finally moving in the right direction. And there's some technologies like web. If you have your web servers are logging, you should be able to detect somebody trying to attack your web server. I mean, it's such a noisy attack. It's just unfortunate that it takes a lot of these big vendors in the SIM space to actually catch up with some of these new technologies.
There was someone in Georgia that was crawling my website. I noticed that because I did some work on the wiki this week, and I was looking in the logs, and I'm like, all I'm seeing is like this traffic from this one particular IP address. I'm like, what is going on? And I realized that and I haven't done it yet, but in Nginx, you can actually redirect an IP address to a specific page. I'm like, well, I could be really evil right now.
Send them to some DoD website.
Well, no, and it goes back to your story, John, of when you called someone on the phone and be like, hey, can you stop hacking into my website, please?
Yeah. It's a good learning lesson for everyone involved, right?
Yes, absolutely. April, I didn't know if you had comments on
well,
SIM.
I was going to say
feel
two
free to
things about
interject,
SIM.
yeah.
One, I think it's fairly easy to set up a SIM. I think that getting logs, ingesting logs, that's the easy part. Tuning it is another problem. That is where it gets into nuances of what is really an alert, what is a false positive, et cetera. And then to the point of not sending all the logs, the problem with that from an offensive perspective is that if you don't send all the logs, then attackers know what you're watching and what you're not watching. So it's more important to send everything so that they can't try to figure out if there's some way around the logging. If you're just logging everything and sending it, then...
I hate to disagree, but as an attacker, we generally don't care because they're not catching anything anyway. So it's not really a problem by and large in most. Now, after the fact, after the patient is dead and the organization's been compromised, absolutely. But whenever we're actually launching a lot of our attacks, it's very rare for a customer to actually detect what we're doing. So we haven't even gotten to that point yet. So I still am very much against log absolutely everything. I would say when you're trying to watch everything, you see nothing.
John, I'm going to side with April here and just talk about what I learned from some vendors and how they process logs, right? And so when they say log everything, that doesn't mean you necessarily store everything in the same format that you ingest in. So you pick, there's like a two-tier system. You take what's interesting, right, and that you may store more of. You take what you deem as less interesting, and you normalize it and compress it. And so the 500 events that are, invalid login become one event, and then that gets compressed and stored in secondary storage. And you can always go back to it if there is an incident. Although I do agree with John, like through logs, detecting advanced attackers is not really feasible.
And that's a risk-based decision too. If you are at a maturity point where you think that you can, use your SIM in a better way, and you are tuned, and you're at a more mature state, then I think that it's more reasonable to send everything rather than just looking for interesting things.
Well, so on that topic, you brought up consulting with SIM, especially user analytics. If you bring in a third party, they don't know as much about your organization as you do. And so if it's consulting to assist you to define those rules, or if they know better, I've been doing it every day, I see pros and cons there, but sometimes the costs outweighs the benefits, depending on your organization. So I'd be interested to see what the numbers show.
Yeah, I think in general in our industry we need a lower barrier to entry or barrier to actually making things useful, other than bringing in consultants to say, well, I'm going to use my SIM or some new security technology that looks at logs, for example, to let me get useful information. I shouldn't take months in an army of consultants to do that. You should be able to have some wins on your own.
So is there something to be said for, all of us have our professions and our expertise. But when you go into an organization, let's say they don't know this thing. You come in, you're an expert, you do things, and then you leave.
Right.
They don't have that knowledge. So enabling them is probably a better focus for consulting.
Yeah.
Long term.
It ties into our other story that I had here, and I forget who this is from. I picked this up from Beta News, and it was a study done by Bay Dynamics. I actually interviewed someone from Bay Dynamics, and they're doing security today, which is kind of weird. You don't think of Bay Dynamics as security, but they do security. They surveyed some folks and had some interesting statistics about whether or not you trust your security tools or not. So they said 64% of threat alerts are not addressed each day, Also, 79% of the respondents say their patching approval process is significantly manual, yet when asked to rate the level of maturity of their vulnerability management programs, 87% say they have a very mature to moderately mature patching process. I think people were confused when they took this survey. I don't know about you, John.
I think a lot of that for the vulnerability management comes from the fact that people consider the vulnerability management program to be successful when they've gotten rid of reds and sometimes it's purple for the supercriticals. They're like, well, if we got those taken care of, we're good. We can ignore anything medium and below. And as we've discussed in the past, that just doesn't work. If you keep ignoring that, you're going to ignore all kinds of vulnerabilities that an attacker can easily gain access to. So I think that's probably why there's a lot of vulnerabilities coming in, and why they think that they're moderately successful, because they can look at the dashboard and not see red and purple.
Yep, I agree. This was an interesting partnership. So Raspberry, R-A-Z-B-R-I, and Cylance entered in an OEM partnership agreement that, and here's the marketing, you ready for this, John, will bring AI-powered cybersecurity to video surveillance systems. I can't even say that with a straight face.
I'm just going to say it with a straight face, this is an earth-shattering partnership between these two vendors. I think it's kind of like Cheers, right? Will they, won't they? Finally they did. And it's just a fantastic partnership for everybody. And I, for one, am really happy to be here at the end days of the need for webcasts and podcasts like Enterprise Security Weekly, because problem solved, ladies and gentlemen.
We have AI-powered cybersecurity, John. I mean, what more do you need,
AI,
right?
But no. It wasn't just the cybersecurity, Paul. It was the coupling of that with video cameras. That's what finally put us over the edge.
And so Raspberry makes a product called Camera Defense that, combined with Raspberry's security appliance architecture, provides comprehensive protection over the server, video management system, or VMS, and camera ecosystem. I was like, it's kind of like we don't want to suck at security like all the other camera companies, so we're just going to run Cylance. I hear you like AI-powered cybersecurity, so we put some AI-powered cybersecurity in your video surveillance system.
So do you think this stems from the Mirai stuff where everyone had IoT?
Yes.
And all the security researchers and endpoint protection, they went, not our problem. But we actually can't help. So I see this probably stemming from that, but one product versus, I think, and I know Cylance guys pretty well, but I think Siemens has something, and a couple other organizations are rolling out IoT type thing. Because what do you do, right? You got endpoints that just fall in another bucket.
In most of the camera surveillance systems that we saw with Mirai are Linux-based little appliances. Yeah. I don't know how Cylance helps with that.
Well, and if you're leaving default credentials on them, I don't. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it helps at all.
No,
does it?
No.
I mean, if it's Linux, they handle Linux as far as I know. So if it's just,
do they? Okay.
I believe so. Don't quote me on that. But they do endpoints. So if it's just a product supporting that as an endpoint,
back to John's point, though, a lot of the vulnerabilities are going to leave you bypassing any kind of endpoint. Story. Yeah. So I thought that was a really interesting partnership for discussion. Gamma Tech announces integration between Code Sonar and Wind River Workbench. Now, speaking of IoT and actually having some wins, this is a story that I think will inspire some confidence anyway in IoT security. So Code Sonar is a static analysis tool, I would assume a tool for developers to write better code, from what I understood from their marketing. And Wind River, of course, makes VxWorks, which is very popular on the IoT front. So this, according to the announcement, will help people writing code for Wind River products, help them write more secure code, and also analyze the code, which I thought was kind of interesting because the announcement said, well, first of all, it said that these tools will merge, or a partnership is created, thereby significantly boosting productivity. And I thought it was very interesting. They used the word productivity and not security or cybersecurity, or even AI-powered cybersecurity. They use the word productivity because
it makes sense, right?
It absolutely does, because as a developer, you don't care about security, you care about productivity. So if you're going to buy a product, you want one that makes you more productive, not more secure.
That's unfortunately true.
Yeah, but then when it analyzes the code in VxWorks, it's probably going to have a field day. I can just see this tool going off.
You're still using gets and sprintf.
Yes,
what the?
Exactly.
Gamatech is just going to like walk away and be like, I'm out. I'm not.
Yeah. They're going to have a overloaded product on their hands with alerts and stuff. So, but I still think that's a good thing, and we've actually covered some wins in IoT with announcements like this. So, I'm encouraged until my friends in the security community pull me back down a couple of pegs and destroy my optimism, like Jack Daniel and Jeff Mann do, pretty much every week.
Yeah.
So, FirstWave has partnered with Fortinet. FirstWave is a multi-service, multi-cloud, cloud security platform for telcos and service providers, which will now be further enhanced with integration into Fortinet's threat intelligence and advanced threat protection solutions. I feel like I need a shower after reading all that. I feel dirty. I actually feel dirty right now.
But this one, you read the entire press statement.
That's pretty much it.
Thing.
Yeah.
It's like somebody got up to like release a press statement on this and like, oh God, why bother? It's just anything more than one run-on sentence is too much.
Didn't someone have a marketing slogan or press release generator that like just strings together? Someone had that.
It was just a whole bunch of fluff words.
Yeah. I remember seeing that. Anyway, it sounds like they use that. Well, I don't know. What is a multi-service, multi-cloud, cloud security platform? What does that even mean? I don't even know what that means.
It's actually a multi-dimensional flux capacitor array. You probably wouldn't understand it.
Well, my understanding is that a lot of customers have multiple clouds, and they won't just pick one. They'll put workloads at, let's say, AWS for a certain thing. They'll put workloads somewhere else for a different type of activity, and they do have different types of security. So you might need an ITAR cloud at one company, and you might need a FedRAMP cloud somewhere else or something like that. And in order to do, especially if you have a very large business, that is in a lot of different fields that have regulatory requirements. So, I've seen a lot of things that are trying to bridge those clouds for the enterprise.
Yeah, but in all honesty, I think that's what they mean by multi-service, multi-cloud. I'm assuming they mean the software as a service. So, for example, your Office 365, you have Salesforce, you've got infrastructure in Azure, and infrastructure in AWS. That's totally feasible, right? Because Microsoft is pushing everyone, hey, host your AD in Azure, get off of any local Exchange or Office products and move into our software as a service. And then on the AWS side, if you have web applications or a Linux environment, your logical step is to move that into AWS in varying forms. And then if you sell stuff, you likely have Salesforce, which is another thing. So yeah, I totally think that's where security is going. I'm not familiar with FirstWave, but I think if we just speculate that that's what they were talking about and make them seem smart, and they'll be like, yeah, that's what we were talking about, what they said. So a major update for Acunetics is online now. John, have you I know you were the one that actually told me about Acunetics several years ago. Have you kept up with them? Yeah. Do you use that product today? Or?
We still keep them around.
Okay. Do you use the FAT client?
Huh?
You use the FAT client, the like Windows software?
Yeah, we do actually use the Windows-based scanning engine. This one is a bit different. I kind of like this. The idea of tying together vulnerabilities and then integrating with web application firewalls to try to coordinate the vulnerabilities and any attacks that are going to those fields. This is kind of an interesting way of trying to reduce false positives and trying to focus on the attacks that actually are tied to a vulnerability that was discovered. But Acunetics has always kind of had a weird approach to it. And it's not that it's bad. It's actually a pretty cool approach. Years ago when they first came out, you could put an agent on a web server, and then you could scan the web server, and the agent would see everything that's coming in and see what's going to the backend database. And it would give you a lot better understanding as far as what the vulnerabilities actually are and how to tweak the scan to make it more effective, because it's seeing the attack, the stimulus, and the response and tuning it accordingly, which is kind of a cool approach. But no, I like this.
But does that actually work?
Yeah, it actually did. Whenever we were running it with some of our customers, that we got them into using Acunetics. For example, SQL injection sometimes would be mangled on the way back into the database, and a few small tweaks would actually allow it to work And whenever you have the agent on the other side, it can see the SQL injection attack come through, see how it's mangled, and then it can modify it accordingly, or at least give you as a web pen tester a notification. This thing made it through, but it was modified slightly, and then you could go back through with something like burp and modify that attack string appropriately to make it trigger on the other end. So it's cool. I think it's a neat approach, and now that they're interacting with web application firewalls, I think that's even better.
Yeah, I think it's really application dependent how well the Acunetics agent worked. Like when I tested it, it was just okay. Like I didn't find it fully very useful. But my applications were weird that I was testing. So
from an enterprise perspective, this approach and other vendors have kind of done it at varying scales. It really makes sense because if you're scanning things and there's some directory or whatever, you're going to get that full viewpoint, and then you can give the developer hey, we kind of blocked this or sanitized it, go fix it. So it gives you that little bit of time to fix it.
Right. As long as you don't call it a virtual patch, I'm okay with it.
That hasn't showed up today yet. Not yet.
Yeah, because I hate that. The one thing I liked out of this announcement was that now in Acunetics, so this is the Acunetics online product. Okay. I'm not sure if their online product worked with the agent. I'm not sure. It might today. I haven't tested it in over a year, but their online product is very similar to other vendors who are also sponsors on the network as well. So, but you basically, it's a cloud service. You let it scan your web applications. They also couple in OpenVAS, so it can do network-based scanning as well as web app scanning, which is pretty cool. But they have a business criticality can now be assigned to targets, enabling customers to immediately identify and address vulnerabilities on critical servers. So this is something in vulnerability scanning and management space that I've always loved, is the ability for the end user to say, these assets are really critical, these are not, and prioritize vulnerabilities that way rather than on the severity of the vulnerability, as John's already pointed out in this show, right? The severity is somewhat arbitrary to your organization, and prioritizing based on the data that's contained on that asset, I think is a much better approach, and it's nice to see vendors building it into their products.
I think it's a good piece of an approach. I think that there are other factors that you need to know. If something's extremely important, but it's also well protected, then it may not. You have to take into account the other factors as well. So it's not just the rating; it's all of the protections and the holistic
mitigating circumstances.
Exactly.
Correct is another factor in that.
Anything that gives you more visibility into these types of things, vulnerabilities, and the attacks, I think is always good. It's at least a step in the right direction.
And it's interesting, in order to build that kind of visibility into all of your vulnerabilities, I mostly see people who are successful with it build their own tools. Like we talk about vendors on the show all the time, but the success stories I have are all people that are like, well, we know like who owns that system and what data's on it and what mitigations are potentially in place and what, all of those factors. And when we get a new vulnerability, we run it through our algorithm and then we assign it to the person with our own severity level. That's almost always custom. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you want to do a startup in security, that would be one of my recommendations, is to go build that so people can implement that in their network.
The other thing that a lot of people don't think about is the enterprise application as a whole. So it's not just the server itself or the one asset, it's the entire ecosystem that supports that asset.
Right, where your data travels across.
And what connects to those things. So are there other ways to hop into the environment rather than from the outside?
Yeah. We actually set up a capture flag this way is you could put in attack strings going to the web server. It didn't affect that, but it affected the SOC on the back end when it presented it to the screen. There's double Unicode or something. So I would be interested from a WAF perspective how intelligent it is. If I'm playing with a certain parameter or whatever, you can go down a rabbit hole there, but really curious.
So one of the nicer things about this is a lot of times when we're encountering web application firewalls is that the web application firewall will be tuned for an application. Let's say they get 100% coverage, which never happens, but they get 100% coverage of all the input fields and all the different input parameters and what should be allowed in those things. And then as the application continues to grow and evolve, then there's new parameters and new pages and new parts that show up, and the web application firewall hasn't been quite trained to actually look for those attacks on those particular parts of the application. And by coupling the idea of something like a scanner, any scanner whatsoever, which is part of its job is actually identifying those input parameters and those fields, and then tying that together with the web application firewall is something that we desperately need, so that the web application firewall can be trained further as far as what new parameters have showed up, what new pages have appeared, any new services that may be showing up, like JSON, things like that. So I think that that's a really cool thing that can possibly come from this. I don't think that that's here yet, but yeah, we need to have some type of feedback loop that's constantly crawling the website, like a good web application scanning engine will do, feeding that into the web application firewall so it knows what parameters to actually defend. That would be a great thing. If anybody's listening to this, if your product could start doing that, feeding that cycle in, that would really improve the overall web application security footprint for an organization.
The next story I had here was from Sky High, who self-servingly wrote an article, 5 pitfalls to avoid during CASB evaluation, which as a vendor, I worked for a vendor for a long time, and you do want to make recommendations as to how people should evaluate it. They're going to take it with a grain of salt because you are the vendor. And in Sky High's defense, their recommendations were good, and not just for CASBs, but for really any security solution. So scalability, alert fatigue, integration with existing infrastructure, data privacy requirements, and support for new cloud services are all good things to consider when you're looking at security solutions. I like to caution people about the integration issues that you have when you're putting security solutions together, because the devil is in the details, right? So direction matters, like vendor X integrates with vendor Y, but what direction? Is it from X to Y, Y to X, or is it multi-directional, right? And then, what can you actually do with that integration? Is it just, getting stuff, or is it taking action on stuff? What does it actually do? And security vendors, and I think all vendors, in particular when we talk about integrations in technology, they use it sometimes for marketing hype, oh, we integrate with this vendor now, when really you're just maybe hooking their API and presenting some data in your web interface. Oh, it's an that's not an integration, right?
It's no. We speak syslog.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Syslog plus 100 hours of consulting service. Right?
Yeah, to parse whatever's coming in, right? So I would put that out there for integrations, as we cover a lot of them on the show, and it's hard from the marketing to understand exactly what it does sometimes too.
But that can also open up your attack surface too.
It could, yes, it could. Yeah, anytime data travels between security products, absolutely. And API security is not always that great either. That's a good point. CyberArk has acquired Conjur for $42 million in cash. CyberArk just is swallowing up other companies. This is last week we talked about CyberArk buying a company, and maybe about a month ago they're just acquiring. Probably an effort. Usually when companies do that, they want to go public, right? Is CyberArk, they're not already public, are they? No. They're probably they're looking like their exit strategy for them. But we also see a lot of other IAM companies buying DevOps companies. And I think, John, you're the one that said this on the show, and this trend has continued. It's that you've got thousands of developers. They're all doing DevOps and managing the roles and responsibilities and privileges across those developers when you've got a DevOps environment is extremely difficult. And I think that's why you're seeing these mergers and acquisitions.
Well, it's kind of like what April was talking about a few seconds ago. The more you open up APIs, the more you start doing this integration, the more security vulnerabilities you have. And that's not just an issue for security tools. It's also a massive issue as you're standing up all these different microservices and then tearing them down. Maybe you're not setting them up properly. What are the security tokens for these particular applications to communicate with each other? Are these APIs just blindly exposed to absolutely anything that can send a JSON request coming into them? So we're seeing complexity in many of our customers. And this is one of those things that's kind of cool, because of CyberArk and the idea of DevOps and the idea of microservices is the entire game, not just in security, but in IT, is changing dramatically. And there's very few companies out there that are actually looking at where that's going to be over the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that this was a great move. And we've often talked about how much we like CyberArk for that privileged identity and access management component in organizations that seems to be missing so often. So the idea that now you can tie that in with the access and the identity management for different services, the secrets, the tokens, the user IDs, the passwords that are being used on service accounts across an enterprise at any of the cloud services, microservices that are out there is just cool. We need to see more technology like this. Now, how well it works, I don't know. I just know it's a really, really complicated thing that we can oftentimes take advantage of. But this is one of those areas, like, people are like, what's Docker security look like? Well, Docker hasn't been around all that long. There's not a lot of people that are going through and writing plugins and doing full analysis on it. The ISURON hasn't focused on it yet. So a lot of people aren't even thinking about this type of DevOps security, but it's something that's going to come and start biting organizations very quickly if they don't start looking into it. So it's neat. And Conjurer is a cool company as well.
It's interesting, we went through this whole segment without mentioning the word ransomware or WannaCry, because we're reserving that. We actually talked about stuff that was not related to that. However, this next segment is going to talk about the security vendor response to WannaCry and how it makes us want to cry. So stay tuned.